At my brother's Christmas dinner, his wife pointed at me in front of everyone and said, "Oh, honey, the caterers are setting up in the back. You can help them." The whole room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before my brother laughed and said, "She's fine with that." I smiled, set down my glass of sparkling water, and walked toward the kitchen. That same night, I sent one email. By the following Monday morning, my brother's business partner was asking him why the silent investor behind their Series A had just requested a full audit. But let me back up. I am 29 years old. I drive a 2017 Honda Civic that I have had since grad school. I shop at normal stores. I get my hair done at a salon that does not require a membership or a deposit. I wear clean, simple clothes that do not have visible logos on them. When I show up to family events, I am usually the one who brings a casserole or a pie, not a bottle of wine that costs more than someone's electric bill. This is not because I cannot afford the wine. This is because I learned a long time ago that the moment people know what you have, they stop seeing who you are. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is not important. I will call him my brother. He married his wife, who I will call my sister-in-law, 7 years ago. She came from a family that had money the way some people have allergies constantly, loudly, and as a defining personality trait. She wore it in her posture. She wore it in the way she looked at people's shoes before she looked at their faces. She wore it in the specific pause she took before responding to anything I said, as if translating my words from a language she found mildly offensive. My brother, for his part, adored her. And because he adored her, he slowly became her. The version of my brother I grew up with used to eat cereal for dinner and fall asleep watching sports highlights. The version I watched across dinner tables for the last several years checked his cufflinks when he talked and referred to his childhood neighborhood as where we were before. Before what? I always wanted to ask. But I never did. My mother lived with my brother and his wife for about 2 years after she got older and needed more help around the house. I offered to contribute to her care, offered to set up payments, offered to find a good facility closer to me if that was easier. My sister-in-law always said, "We have it handled." What I understood that to mean was, "We are handling it, and we would like you to be aware of that, and we would like credit for it at every family gathering for the rest of recorded history." So, that is the background. That is the water we all swam in. Now let me tell you about the Christmas dinner. My brother and his wife had recently moved into a new house. It was large. It had a foyer, which is a room whose entire purpose is to let you know you are entering a house with a foyer. They had it decorated by someone they kept referring to as our designer, and there were small ornamental trees in the corners of the living room that looked expensive and also slightly sad, the way things sometimes do when they are trying very hard. I arrived on time. I had a pie with me, because I always bring a pie, and also because I genuinely like baking and find it calming, and I was not about to let anyone take that from me. My sister-in-law opened the door, looked at the pie, and said, "Oh, you brought something from a box mix?" I had not. I told her I had not. She smiled in a way that did not reach anywhere near her eyes and said, "Well, it's sweet." Then she took the pie without looking at it again and turned to greet the couple behind me who had just pulled up in a car I recognized as Elise. Inside, the house was full of people. My brother's in-laws were there. 3 couples from what I understood to be their social circle. My aunt, who is wonderful and was already stationed near the appetizers. My mother, who was seated in the living room in the good chair, the one near the window, and who looked genuinely happy. I went to her first. I sat with her for 20 minutes and held her hand, and she told me she liked my earrings. That part of the evening was good. Then dinner was called, and things shifted. The dining table was long and had been set with what I assumed was their good china. There were place cards. I found mine at the far end of the table, next to my brother's 9-year-old son, who I will call my nephew, and a cousin of my sister-in-law's who I had never met and who spent most of dinner looking at his phone. My nephew is a child who has been told, at some consistent frequency, that he is exceptional. Not in the way that all parents privately believe their children are exceptional and keep that to themselves. In the way that gets announced, in the way that becomes the child's whole orientation toward other people. He looked at me when I sat down and said, "Why are you always at the kid table?" I told him this was just where my seat was placed. He said, "Mom says you don't really fit in with the grown-up side." I looked at him for a moment. He was 9. He was repeating something. I understood that. I took a breath and said, "Let's just have a nice dinner," and unfolded my napkin. About 40 minutes into the meal, while I was in the middle of a sentence talking to my aunt across the table, my nephew reached over and knocked my glass of red wine directly into my lap. It was not an accident. I saw his hand move deliberately before it made contact. The glass went over. The wine spread across the front of my cream-colored pants in a wide, immediate stain, and I pushed back from the table before it could reach the chair. The table went quiet. I looked at my nephew. He was looking at his plate. I looked at my sister-in-law. She was dabbing her mouth with her napkin. She said, "These things happen." I waited for something else. An instruction to her son, an apology on his behalf, a look that communicated anything other than mild inconvenience. She said, "There's club soda under the sink if you want to go deal with that." My brother, from the head of the table, said, "Yeah, go get cleaned up, it's fine." "It's fine." I stood up. I was very calm. People tell me this about myself, that I am calm in situations that warrant a different reaction. I do not always know if this is a compliment or a description of damage. Either way, I excused myself from the table, walked to the bathroom, looked at my reflection for a moment, and made a decision. When I came back to the table, dinner had resumed. My nephew had not been spoken to about what happened. I could tell because he was eating with the same expression he had before, unbothered, already somewhere else in his mind. After dinner, while people were moving to the living room for dessert, my sister-in-law found me near the kitchen doorway and said, very pleasantly, "I hope you're not reading too much into things. He's a child. They're clumsy." I said, "He wasn't clumsy. He did it on purpose." She looked at me with something close to amusement and said, "You've always had a flair for drama. It's kind of endearing, honestly." Then she walked away to refill someone's coffee. My brother found me a few minutes later. I thought, for one moment, that he was going to say something real. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey, don't make this weird. She's had a long week with all the planning." I nodded. I said, "Of course." He clapped my shoulder once and went back to his guests. I said goodbye to my mother. She held my face in her hands and told me to drive safely. I said goodbye to my aunt. I picked up my coat. On the way out, my sister-in-law called after me from across the foyer. "You forgot your pie dish. We'll just toss the rest. We have so many desserts." I took the dish. I drove home, and then I opened my laptop. Here is the thing about me that my family did not know, that my brother specifically did not know. After graduate school, I took a job as a software engineer at a company that you would recognize the name of. I was good at my job. Within 3 years, I was a senior engineer. Within 5, I was leading a team. I lived carefully. I invested carefully. I had a financial advisor I had been working with since I was 24 who had a specific talent for taking what I gave her and turning it into things I never had to think about again. 2 years ago, a colleague of mine came to me with an opportunity. He was starting a logistics software company. Small team, good product, real market need. He needed a seed investor, someone quiet, someone who did not want board seats or naming rights, someone who just wanted equity and to see the thing succeed. I had done this twice before with smaller amounts. This time I wrote a larger check. The company was structured with my investment coming through an LLC I had set up called Birchfield Capital Group. My name was not on the operating documents. My colleague knew who I was. The rest of the company's founders did not. My brother was one of those founders. He had joined the company 14 months earlier as a co-founder, brought in by the original team for his operations background. He knew there was a silent investor. He knew the investor had come in through Birchfield Capital Group. He did not know that Birchfield Capital Group was me. He had never asked. He had never connected the name. Why would he? I drove a Honda Civic and brought pies to Christmas dinner. In the weeks after Christmas, I sat with what I was going to do. I did not act immediately. I want to be clear about that. I am not someone who makes decisions the night that something happens to them. I gave it time. I thought about my mother, who was living in that house. I thought about the company. which was doing well and had employees who were not responsible for any of this. I thought about whether the version of me sitting at that dinner table with wine on her pants was someone I wanted to make decisions for, or whether I should wait until I could think cleanly. I waited 6 weeks. Then I called my financial advisor. I told her I wanted to understand what my options were as a minority equity holder regarding a formal performance and conduct review of founding team members. She told me I had a right to request an independent audit of operational decisions made in my investment period, and that depending on what such an audit surfaced, I had several potential paths available to me. I said, "Let's start with the audit request." She filed it through Birchfield Capital Group on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my colleague who ran the company called me personally. He said, "I don't know what happened, but I assume something did." I told him what happened. I was matter-of-fact about it. I did not exaggerate. I did not dramatize. I told him the dinner, the wine, the comment about the caterers, the response from my brother, the comment from his wife. I told him about the 6 weeks I had spent deciding what to do. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I had no idea you were related." I said, "I know, that's the point." He said, "What do you want?" I thought about that. I said, "I want the audit to proceed. I want it to be real, not procedural, and I want my brother to find out who requested it and why before the results come back." My colleague said he understood. The audit request went to the full founding team 3 days later. I understand from what came next that my brother spent approximately 2 days assuming it was a routine investor action, the kind of thing that happens sometimes when equity structures shift or a new funding round is being prepared. He was calm about it, according to what I later heard. Experienced, businesslike. Then the cover letter was released, which identified the requesting party as Birchfield Capital Group, and attached to it was a brief letter from my financial advisor that explained, for the purposes of transparency and proper disclosure, that Birchfield Capital Group was wholly owned and operated by me. My full name, my contact information, his sister. I was told that he read it twice before he called my colleague. I was told that my colleague said, simply, "Yes, it's her." My phone rang 4 times that afternoon with my brother's number. I did not answer. I texted him once. "I'll talk when the audit is done. Take care of Mom." His wife called me from her own phone 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that started composed and ended somewhere else entirely. She used the phrase, "You've always been jealous," twice. She used the phrase, "This is so petty," once. She said that what I was doing was going to affect a lot of innocent people. I thought about my nephew, who was 9 years old and had been taught that knocking a wine glass onto someone was consequence-free as long as that person was less important than you. I thought about my brother saying it's fine. I did not call her back. The audit took 5 weeks. During that time, I got one text from my mother. It said, "I heard something is happening with your brother's work. Are you okay?" I called her immediately. I did not go into details. I told her I was okay, that things were complicated, and that I loved her very much and that none of what was happening had anything to do with her or changed anything between us. She said, "I know you. You don't do things without a reason." I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Good." And that was the end of that conversation. The audit came back with some findings that were not catastrophic but were significant. There were operational decisions that had been made without proper investor notification as required by the operating agreement. There were vendor contracts signed in a window that required investor sign-off that had not received it. Nothing criminal, but enough. Based on the findings, my financial advisor sent a formal notice of breach to the company. The notice outlined the specific violations and indicated that, under the terms of the operating agreement, continued breach would trigger an equity review clause that could result in dilution of the breaching party's stake. My brother retained a lawyer within 48 hours. His lawyer called my financial advisor's office and attempted to negotiate a resolution that would involve me withdrawing the breach notice in exchange for a formal apology and updated operational protocols going forward. My advisor brought this to me. I said, "The apology has to come from him directly, in writing, and it has to include his wife." There was a pause in the negotiations for about a week. Then my brother called me again. This time I answered. He did not sound like my brother. He sounded like someone wearing my brother's voice over something that had gone very tired. He said my name. He said he needed to talk. I said I was listening. He said, I didn't know. About the investment. I really didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. He said, that doesn't excuse the dinner. I said, no, it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she's not a bad person. She gets caught up in how things look. She's been that way her whole life and I've let it go on too long without saying something and I know that's on me. I said, your son knocked a glass of wine into my lap on purpose and neither of you said a word to him. My brother didn't respond immediately. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter. He said, I know. I've thought about that a lot since all of this started. I've thought about what he's learning from us. From me. He exhaled. I talked to him. After I found out who you were, I sat down with him and we had a real conversation about it. He knows what he did was wrong. He knows it wasn't an accident and that I know it wasn't an accident. He apologized. I should have made him apologize that night. I asked him why he didn't. He said, because she would have been upset. Because she always gets upset when I correct him in front of people and I've gotten so used to just letting things go to avoid the fight. I sat with that. I said, that's a pattern, not an accident. He said, yes, just that, yes. The written apology came 4 days later. Both of them signed it. My sister-in-law's portion was shorter and more formal, the kind of language that suggests a lawyer was involved in the drafting, but she signed it and her name was on it, and that mattered more to me than the warmth of the words. I withdrew the breach notice. I kept my equity stake. I remained a silent investor. My colleague and I had a separate conversation about how the company would handle disclosure going forward, and we updated the operating agreement language to make investor notification requirements more explicit. This was probably overdue regardless of what happened at Christmas dinner. I did not go to Easter at my brother's house that year. I was not asked, but I was asked to my mother's birthday in April, which was held at my aunt's house, and I went. My brother was there. His wife was there. My nephew was there. My nephew walked up to me before dinner and said, I'm sorry about the wine at Christmas. I shouldn't have done that. He was 9 years old, standing in front of me with his hands at his sides, and I could tell from the way he said it that someone had made him practice it, but I could also tell from the way he looked at me that he meant it, or was starting to. Children are like that. They can arrive at genuine things through structured routes. I said, thank you for telling me that. I accept your apology. He nodded seriously. Then he said, are you really the one who invested in Dad's company? I said, that's kind of a grown-up conversation, but yes. His eyes went very wide. He said, that's actually really cool. I said, thank you. He went back to the appetizer table. I watched him go and thought about the distance between who he was right then and who he could become, and how much of that distance would be covered by what his parents taught him in the years ahead. Children have options. That is the thing about them. They have not run out of options yet. My sister-in-law and I spoke briefly after dinner. She was more careful with me than she had ever been, which I understood. Some of that carefulness was strategic, but some of it, I thought, might have been something else. She asked about my work. She asked about the city I lived in. She said, at one point, I think I underestimated you for a long time. I said, a lot of people do. She said, I think that might be somewhat intentional on your part. I said, somewhat. She almost smiled. It was the most real moment we had ever had. I am not telling you this story because I think I am some kind of hero. I am not. I made a significant financial and legal move against my brother's company because his wife humiliated me at a dinner party and neither of them thought it warranted a response. That is the honest version. The audit was legitimate and the breach findings were real, but I would not have requested it if I had not been sitting at the far end of a table in wine-stained pants listening to someone tell me to go deal with it. What I know is this. People treat you the way you allow them to treat you. And for a long time I allowed my brother's household to treat me as someone whose presence was a courtesy they were extending rather than a relationship they were participating in. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it did not bother me. I told myself I was above it. I was not above it. I was just quiet about it. The thing that changed was not the wine glass. The wine glass was just the night I decided to stop pretending I was above it. My mother called me a few weeks after the birthday dinner. She said, "I don't know everything that happened between you and your brother, and I'm not asking, but I want you to know that I see you. I've always seen you." I should have said that more. I told her. She said it plenty. She said she didn't think so. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. And I believed her, fully, without anything complicated attached to it, which is the best way to believe someone when they say that. I still bring a pie to family events. I brought one to the 4th of July at my aunt's house and one to Thanksgiving, which was at a restaurant this year, and everyone got a slice. It was a salted honey pie with a buttermilk crust that I had been working on for about a year and finally got right in October. My nephew had 2 pieces. He said it was the best thing he had ever eaten. I told him the recipe wasn't secret, that I would teach him sometime if he wanted to learn. He said he definitely wanted to learn. I said, "Good, that's how you start."